Let's talk about using Nintex Live to connect Nintex workflow to Office 365. I don't just want to talk about it. Let's run through a demo that shows you from start to finish exactly how to make this happen. Let's begin with this SharePoint site. This happens to live inside of the firewall, inside of a standard SharePoint site. We've got content in here that once it runs through a workflow, we'd like to publish to this SharePoint Online site hosted by Office 365. This is a document library and there's nothing inside it at the moment. Let's change that. So we're going to create a workflow here inside of Nintex Workflow specifically to publish content to Office 365. We need to give Nintex Workflow the ability to talk to Office 365, and we're going to use Nintex Live to do that. This is a service that runs in Windows Azure. It presents a catalog of available services. Some come from Bing, some come from StrikeIron, some come from social networking services. We want the ones that talk to Office 365, very specifically the one that can push a document to a SharePoint Online site, and there it is. Let's click Add and click OK. Now let's go to the Nintex Workflow toolbox, click on the Nintex Live category, and drag and drop that action into place. And now we have to configure it. So we go into here, and the first thing we need to do is indicate that we're going to upload the current item that the workflow is working on, and we need to indicate where that's going to go. So first off, it's the SharePoint Online site that's living up in the cloud that we need to identify, and also the document library and possibly the folder into which we're going to copy it. Obviously, the file's got a name, but our workflow context fields happen to know that exact name, so we don't need to rename it unless for some reason we want to. The rest of this is login information. So the Office 365 tenancy has a particular URL. We need to provide that. And then it's a matter of putting in a username and putting in a password. And once we do that, our Nintex Live service that knows how to talk to Office 365 will use all of this to act on your behalf to put the document in the right place. Let's click Save. And now let's configure the workflow as a whole. Not much to do other than give it a proper name, and also for convenience sake, we're going to, by clicking one checkbox and typing in a name, make sure that this can be invoked manually from the drop-down menu of the document. There we go. Click Save. And as any regular user of Nintex Workflow ought to understand, when we publish this, no code is involved, no code is created, no code is deployed. SharePoint itself is going to run the workflow for us, and we're going to invoke it manually from the drop-down menu. There's a picture of the workflow. We click Start, and the gears start grinding. So SharePoint is going to take the XML instructions we published to it, just in time compile them, and then execute this workflow accordingly. And if we'd like to watch it execute, we can go here, look at the workflow history, and get a graphical picture of what's going on. Let's click here, and now we wait a minute or so. While we're waiting, here's how it works. There are a lot of cloud services out there from Office 365 and other environments. Some are simple with a request and a response. Others involve a lot of multiple retries until you get a successful response. Still more might involve picking up a token and then redeeming it for a response at a later point in time. And others even involve things like you setting up a receiver service and having it call you back once the response is received. Nintex Live exists as a cloud-hosted co-pilot for Nintex Workflow 2010. When Nintex Workflow 2010 workflows get to the point where they need to talk to something in the cloud, they simply fire a SharePoint timer job that communicates with Nintex Live in a very simple way. The request gets processed up in Windows Azure, and we go from there. When the response comes back, the workflow moves on. Everything is managed through queues. Access to all of those cloud services out there are in turn handled by a series of services provided by Nintex Live that know all about the authentication details, all about the connection details, and all of the latency-based complexities. So by virtue of doing this, and by virtue of cataloging all of those services that live out there, we're able to deal with communicating with those web services, authenticating with them, and then presenting to the workflow design environment a nice, friendly, easy-to-use catalog to make it easy to pick and choose the services you want. Now let's go back to this and refresh it. Looks like we've finished the workflow. So let's go back to the Office 365 SharePoint Online site, refresh the view of this document library, and sure enough, there's our copied document. And that, as they say, is that. So if you'd like more information on how to use Nintex Live to connect Nintex Workflow and SharePoint to Office 365 and a world of other services, visit www.nintex.com.